Hi, my name is Lizzie Goldsmith, and I'm the creator of this dramatic audio adaptation of Addie Zierman's memoir, When We Were on Fire. Episode 4, the conclusion to the story, will be out next week. But today I'm talking through some of the themes of Episode 3 with Addie and voiceover artist Aria Sivick, who portrayed Addie. Today we're talking about vulnerability, dark nights of the soul, and the role of swearing in this story. Oh, and be sure to listen all the way to the end for a sneak peek of Episode 4 after the credits. Hi, I'm Lizzie Goldsmith, here again with Addie Zierman and Aria Sivick. Welcome back to this episode recap.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Thanks.
Episode 3 just aired last week, and this is kind of the one that takes place over a shorter period of time. It's a harder episode. It's harder to work on. It was harder to listen to, for me at least. Obviously, it's harder. I rereading the book as well. It's hard to read that part of the book too. And I'm sure, Addie, this being your story and revisiting it in all these different ways, is not easy.
Yeah.
A lot of my friends who I kind of put together a group of friends as a launch group for this audio drama to kind of listen and give me their thoughts and, do we need content warnings? And, is this coming through clearly? They really could hear and feel the loneliness come through. And I don't know, what was it like to write about this period of your life and then revisit it years later?
Oh, it was hard. It was hard. And it's still hard. It was hard to listen to. I have, in the interim years since I wrote the book, revisited a lot the high school and some of the college stuff, but I haven't really gone back to this space. And I think, the high school stuff, it's easy to see, where I was being manipulated. It's easier to, place the blame outward. But this part feels very shamey to me. Like, I feel a lot of shame when I think about this. And, I know exactly how it happened, and I see how it happened. And so just, trying to have empathy for the girl I was. And yeah, I think when the vernacular came out, Pick Me Girl, I was like, oh, I was that. I was so that. I always wanted to be in love. I always wanted to be the one picked. And I think there was too a spiritual aspect of it too, growing up where I did, because the women couldn't be the leader. So you had to be chosen by the guy who was the leader to kind of have that status that you wanted. And, and so I wanted to be in love, and I think I probably, I do not regret anything about my marriage or my meeting Andrew or being with him. And he was the right guy. He is the right guy. But, I probably could have used a couple of years alone to figure out who I was. And I didn't. And I don't think I just read through my early college year journals, and I just so desperately wanted to be in love, and I so wanted to be chosen. And he chose me, and he was steady with me in a way that Chris never was. And he didn't ever really make me feel like I had to prove my faith to him, and continues to be that way. But, I wasn't very good at saying what I wanted or needed back then, and still I'm working on that. And so I didn't say I don't want to go to China, or, I just went because that was what he wanted to do. And so we went, and, so there was just a lot of those years of that kind of stuff. And then, to feel like he fit in so beautifully at house church, and they loved him so much. And it really echoed a lot of, I felt like, what happened with Chris. Like he was beloved. He was the one everybody wanted. He was the one Teen Mania wanted. I was the stumbling block. Even after everything had happened with us, he continued to volunteer with our youth group because, he was the cool Christian guy that the youth pastor wanted. So like, it didn't really matter that it was hard for me. I had to just deal with it. So it kind of brought some of that back up for me. I think, when the house church loved Andrew so much, and I just felt like I didn't have a place. And then, here's this guy at this coffee shop just looking at me like I'm the most amazing thing. And I see exactly how it happened, but it doesn't feel great to listen to it happen again. And I remember when I had the full copy of the book, reading it to Andrew and just sobbing as I read it, and I think it was probably a really good thing that it happened, as painful as it was. It sent us into therapy. It helped us have some conversations we needed to have. It helped us make some changes in our relationship that we needed to make. But it's humbling to listen to, and it's
Yeah. I know people talk about like the term like dark night of the soul, and often spiritual context of that, and there's a lot going on in your story, like spiritually but also relationally, and mental health wise. You just like a lot of, it was like the perfect storm of things. Is dark night of the soul something that resonates with you, or not so much?
Yeah. I mean, I remember hearing that for the first time and feeling really like it articulated what was going on. I think we don't just have the one, and we have several, and some are darker than others. And, I think there's rhythms to our life. And, but that was a really dark time. It was a really dark time. And, I don't, listening to the scenes with the house church ladies, I don't, they sound so cruel and dismissive, and I don't think they were trying to be. I just really think that whatever structure you try to shove it into, the evangelical outlook makes it really hard to know what to do with somebody who is a Christian, who loves Jesus, and who is in a super dark place. And just finding Jesus isn't fixing it. And it's hard to know what to do. And I think they didn't know what to do. And I didn't know how to ask for what I needed. And I really didn't even know how to talk about it unless I was drinking. So,
Yeah. Thank you for your, vulnerability now, but just also in just writing your story and sharing your story. I remember when I first read it, there were things I related to at the time, especially there are things I relate to even more now. It just life being life. But I think your book was one of the first of its kind in the 2010s, where I'm like, wow, this is like, this honesty is like, feels really unprecedented in this genre. To like really just like kind of faith wise, but also just like saying the things that are hard and how they're hard. And it's something that I'm sure readers have talked about, the story being one that helps them feel less alone, just kind of the way I did too. Like how does it feel to sort of have that role, to carry that role of being an almost like a companion in other people's journeys, other people's stories?
I mean, it's I don't take it lightly. I think I felt it was very hard to write, but I feel like I felt like finding the courage to be vulnerable and then finding connection through that was really helpful to me, because when I did share the things I was afraid to share, it felt like people were really receptive and we're thankful that somebody was saying it. And on the other hand, I have also gotten burned from being vulnerable, and so that's hard too. And I'm recently just tiptoeing back online after several years of being kind of away and being afraid to be vulnerable because of that. So, and it, it feels like a sort of toxic space to bring vulnerability right now in the world. Feels like lots of ways for people to use it against you. So how do we continue to be brave with our stories and make those connections with each other? I don't know. And I'm kind of having to relearn this now. I feel I don't know that I would have been so brave writing that story now. I feel like I would have been more guarded with my story, and I'm glad I wasn't, but
yeah, it's hard. I've talked a little bit about why I chose your book for this project, and one of the reasons, and I don't know how big of a reason, was I was kind of going through my own heartbreak at the time, and it was just like kind of a dark place for me too in early 2019, and there's just like a catharsis there of it's your story, but there's so much I connect to, so there's things I can process through while telling this creative story that's like not autobiographical as such, and so I know that was very healing for me when I reflect on it. And my last 6 years has been interesting as well. It's also been kind of like this weird in between. I mean, COVID was a weird in between place too, that shifted a lot of things, but this was a tough episode. And Aria, you were kind of front and center with just bringing these scenes to life. There's lighthearted scenes that we've talked about, but there's also like the scene that always hits me, I think every time I hear it, that like makes me like cry, is like you on the bathroom floor crying, like portraying that scene of just being just so low. And I mean, was it emotional? How was it for you, like, to go through kind of recording scenes like this to the lighthearted? Like, was there this whiplash? Was how did you take care of yourself like through this, with also having busyness in your like there's just a lot to bring to life here, and it takes its toll.
I mean, there's definitely as an actor, there will be different coaches in your life that tell you leave all your personal, things at the door, right? You need to be focused on the role, the character. But I find it most conducive when it's like when you channel, right, like what's going on in your life, your current emotions, and simmer them, appropriately through the catalyst of the character, right? So I think that it definitely was not like a separation. So, and that does require you to lean in and understand the character, which in this case was you, Addie, and you don't judge the character at all. Like, that's the best thing you can do. In order to become the character, you never judge the character. And I think that doing that helped me open up my own experiences and associate my own pain with the pain of the story. And at that point, right, senior in college, some things everybody has, traumatic experiences in their life and terrible experiences in their life. But it's just so interesting talking about now. Where are they now? And I can relate even more, to your story, Addie. So I think I am glad that there was that precedent of just totally leaning into that character, because I think it has stuck with me all these years. Like, I do think about your story often and how we portrayed that and everything. And I think that just shows how powerful and relatable it is. And also just in that it does carry through, and it's good for reflection, which I think was just an early precedent that both Lizzie and I set when recording. For sure. I mean, because there were very hard scenes that I can't say I didn't quite understand yet, at that age in my life experiences. And now I do. and it's just drawing those comparisons, like, it's hard to kind of channel things that you haven't experienced before too. So I think that was the challenge, for sure. And doing it like authentically, as well. Like, I think I've grown a lot in my acting journey since this audio drama, but it definitely was that. It's like the portraying somebody's real experience and trying to do it as genuinely as possible, right?
Well, I think you did a fantastic job, Aria.
Agreed.
Listening back, I'm like,
Thank you.
wow, like. I mean, I thought so at the time too, and then kind of revisiting. It's I mean, you had to carry this piece with your voice, and you really did. And I mean, and you had to be like kind of in the room with me and another engineer, every time, and like kind of go to these places. And I know that's not always easy to be able to do that. And so, like, there's a reason I did not cast myself at any role. I sang It Is Well With My Soul, and that's about all I did on my voice. But
I mean, there's something that you get drawn to, right? Like, I love those roles that have that depth, have that true heart and soul, those true stories. That's what I love. I know if that sounds masochistic, maybe it does. I don't know. But that's like what I love. That's the most immersive and meaningful work, I think.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the role of swearing in this story, because that's people may notice there isn't really any swearing in episode 1, and then it starts in episode 2, and it's not pervasive, but it's enough where it's noticeable. You don't want your kids. It's not a kid's show, and that is something that I think also it's from the book as well, and I wanted to reflect that in the book, and I think we talked about there are ways that like kind of the rawness and the vulnerability for this type of memoir in this Christian space is a little unprecedented. And I think kind of there being swearing is also like it's a choice that you made to have that in. And I want to talk a little bit kind of about that choice, and if that was a hard decision to make, to like be kind of more raw in that way.
Yeah, it's a good question. I was actually, I've been doing this project where I'm going back through all my old journals and archiving them. And, up until like junior high, it's, I'm writing to a diary, dear diary, and it's all about boys and all this stuff. And then, this moment comes in junior high where I start a second journal. It's my prayer journal. And like my earliest entry in that is like, I have everyone swearing and it's so bad and da 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 da, and this kid in my youth group says it's not in the Bible that we shouldn't swear, and I looked and it isn't, and just like, so it was like kind of my first like, I'm going to take a stand on something and it's going to be swearing, and I don't know why, I just feel like a Christian shouldn't do that. And then as I began to deconstruct or kind of go through this time, it began to feel like the truest way to describe it, to use these words that had been forbidden to me or that I had forbidden myself from using. They just started to feel important to use. And then, the farther I got into it, I felt like it was a way that I could identify if someone was safe to talk to. If I said shit, like there's that scene and you put it in the audio where I'm talking to that former youth pastor is that in this section? I think it's in the next section. Mm-hmm. But anyway, there's a line where I say, church people can be shitty, and it's a test. It's a test, and I'm trying to figure out like, how guarded am I with you right now? Like, are you a safe person or are you an unsafe person? And I don't know, it felt important to me to have those in there. It felt really, it felt like part of the fabric of the honesty of the work. And so when we were shopping this around, there were Christian publishers who would have wanted to take the swears out. Mm-hmm. So the deal I accepted was one that allowed me to keep those in. And that was with Convergent initially, and now it's with Bracket. But it just felt really important to me that they were there, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with that choice. I think it's that authenticity, right? Like, if you're having to like kind of censor yourself in a way that's not natural and takes away from the story, that's not what you want to do. Like, whether it's swearing or just another like aspect of your story, and it's your story. And so yeah, and like I said, I kind of, followed, I took the cues from your book, so to speak, and started the script. And yeah, the scene you mentioned, kind of talking to that former youth pastor, I think it was in this section of the book, but that was like one of the few that I moved to episode 4, just because it fit better in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was actually when I was able to take kind of like almost verbatim from the book, which is, I loved when I was able to do that too. When there was whenever there was dialogue, I tried to like keep that dialogue as much as possible, because it just brings it to life so much. But yeah, speaking of sort of those moments of, I mean, I guess everything in the audio drama is dialogue, but I think one part that I always resonate with in this episode is sort of that monologue at the end, which is kind of a combination of different realizations toward the end of the book, but of, it's about, essentially learning to hold things a little more loosely, and realizing that spiritual connection might look a little bit different, than you always thought it should. And, I know we'll talk more about sort of just like where you're at now, where we're all at now, in our last recap, but I did want to talk a little bit, making that shift, as you're kind of making that shift spiritually, and, like moments in therapy and kind of moments in where you're looking at your faith a little bit differently. Did it feel significant, those realizations you were making at the time?
Yeah. I mean, I think there was a time where it was really just a lot of anger. It was just a palpable rage and just so much hurt. And I couldn't imagine a way into something different. It just felt really reactive. And I didn't really, it was very emotional. I couldn't really understand what it was about my evangelical upbringing that contributed to this. I just know that it was part of it, and I was pissed, and I had things to say drunkenly about it. So but then, I think as we got into therapy, and I got into therapy, and I began to find safe spaces, safe, sober spaces to speak about it, where the other person wasn't necessarily like raging with me, but kind of leading me through my rage to something else. It started to pivot, and I think my personal therapist, she was really helpful, as she led me towards some books about cults and about those kind of thought reform and manipulation kind of ideas. And it wasn't something that had ever occurred to me, because we were just Christians and we were just evangelicals, and it couldn't be a cult, because it's, but I think there are cultic techniques that can creep into even really normal spaces. And that's what happened with me. And so being able to sort of name those things that were toxic, and then separate them out from the rest of it, I began to do that work. And that allowed me to have some space to take some of the good stuff back in different ways, and in, capacities, and with different focuses, and began reaching into other language and other, religious expression. And maybe there are other ways that I could think about this that are not, burdened with teen mania language or evangelical language, or, those words that have become very toxic feeling to me.
Thanks for listening to this bonus episode with author Addie Zierman, voice actor Aria Sivick, and me, Lizzie Goldsmith. The music in the background, and so much of the music in this audio drama, was composed by Frank Sheffield. Stay tuned next week for the 4th and final episode of this dramatic audio adaptation of When We Were on Fire, a memoir of consuming faith, tangled love, and starting over. And keep listening for that episode 4 sneak peek, which is actually part of a scene we talked about in this conversation. You can find out more about this production and the book it's based on at whenwewereonfirepodcast.com.
Hey, do you know what Yuletide means?
I don't know. Isn't it the same as Christmas?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. Could I say in this email, for example, may your Yuletide be full of merriment?
Sounds fine to me.
I'm gonna Google it. Aha, okay. Yuletide, the 12-day pagan celebration worshiping the sun. Huh. Probably not a good way to end an email to church people.
Probably not. Church people don't like pagans, and they're real suspicious of the sun.
So you've had some run-ins with the pagan-hating church-going type?
I've been burned by my share of Christians.
That sucks.
Yeah, it's kind of shitty.
Yeah, churches can kind of blow. I actually used to be a youth pastor.
Used to?
Yeah, shitty church politics. I couldn't deal with it anymore. So much drama, you know?
Yeah.